Good morning, everybody, or good day, or good afternoon, or whatever it may be, wherever you are. Welcome to Karpa's reality. So I woke up this morning and pretty early, around 5:30. Did my morning thing, checked out Venus in the sky, and watched the sunrise. Got my son ready for school. Walked him up to kindergarten. It's about a mile away. And it's on my way back when I start doing my thinking for the day. And I'm walking through this park and oh, Bob the rooster's awake. They must have just let him out. So yeah, I was thinking about advice. People who give advice and the people who take the advice. There has to be an ethos, which is the status of the person who's giving the advice. In other words, you can't just have a person giving you advice who's never been in the situation that you're in. I have actually seen too many situations where people want to give advice about something that they have absolutely no idea about. And it's, I wanted to use the example of these, sometimes you'll see these, I'm not going to say the name of the company, you'll see these stickers on these cars, okay? And it's for an herbal company that sells herbal supplements. And the people will tell you, you should start selling these supplements because you can make good money on it. And then you look, and 90% of the cars that they are driving are just beat to hell. The people are obviously broke. I don't mean to generalize all the people who are selling products at all, but this particular, is kind of a pyramid system, and everybody wants to give you advice on how to make money. But you're observing their lives to see if they're actually, living up to the standards. I'm going to give you a better example. About 10 years ago, about 15 years ago or longer, I got in trouble for growing pot. I had to go on probation for 2 years, and towards the end of the probation, I kept getting dirty piss tests. So my probation officer said, look, if you can make it through this program, this drug program for 5 months, it's an outpatient thing, I'll just let you off probation. I just want you gone, basically. I said, okay. So I did it, and I stayed clean. I went into this class, and there were two people that ran the class. It was at the Restitution Center out in Washington County in Oregon. And it was a husband and wife team that ran the drug class, and neither one of them had ever used drugs, okay? Now, not one person in the class listened to anything these people had to say. It's just like a person who's never smoked cigarettes telling you about the benefits of not smoking or quitting. It's very difficult. So we're more willing to look for advice with somebody who actually is in the situation. So I guess what I'm getting at is that, if these people had been ex-drug addicts, I would have been more likely to listen because they were in a situation that they moved out of and they understand the addiction, but they just didn't get it. These people would talk about how bad pot was for an hour, and then they go outside and smoke cigarettes on break. And really, their ethos was, they had absolutely no credibility whatsoever. Now, I guess what I'm getting at here is that sometimes people give advice and people say, well, you're not one to give advice because look at your situation. Maybe they're in a bad situation. Maybe a person is a heavy drug user and they're saying, don't be a heavy drug user. And a person may think, well, why should I listen to you? You're not even following your own advice. Often that's the best advice that we can receive, is advice from people who aren't taking their own advice. And that's kind of the root of what I'm trying to get at, is that when we can see people in situations and they're saying, don't do what I did, it's much more credible than a person just saying, well, don't do this because this is what's happened to other people, but I have no personal experience with this. So I hope you understand kind of what I'm trying to get at, and the point that I'm trying to make is that we shouldn't just cast people's advice or opinions aside merely because they're not living up to the standards that we think they should. And often this this not living to the standards that we think they should is the very reason why they're the best at giving advice. It's the old "don't end up where I am" thing, you know? So, we can take advice, we can give advice. I try not to give too much advice because I find that if I do, I have to live up to my own standards. And it goes back to the old practice what you preach, which I don't always practice what I preach, but I try. I try to practice what I preach. I guess I don't really preach. I talk about the things that I find wrong in the world and whatnot, but you know, I'm willing to admit that I'm just as much of a part of the problem as the next person. That sometimes I give advice on situations that are none of my business, and that sometimes I probably could give advice where I don't, just because I don't want the person to, assume that my situation dictates the validity of the advice. So, I think that the internet has given us a much wider understanding of people and the decisions that they make, and what people are willing to listen to and what they're not, what kind of advice people are willing to take, what kinds of people are interested in advice. Often those who don't want any advice are those who are so stuck in their ways that they have absolutely no desire to change. And I found myself that way in the past, and it wasn't a matter of not wanting to change, it was a matter of, no, I can change the way I want. You will have no bearing on how I change because I'm me. And I think that that's the societal stubbornness that we all carry around. That we want to take advice that will help us, but not from people, because then we feel weak. We feel as if taking someone's advice makes us weaker, like we didn't know, or we should have known better. And I don't see it that way. I think listening and taking advice is a major strength, and one that I need to work on myself without getting defensive, because I think we all get defensive. And so I'll leave on that note, the defensive issue. If somebody gives you advice, just consider the advice, not necessarily the source, but the advice itself and the basis for it. But ultimately it's going to be up to the individual, and sometimes if a person gets defensive, it's because they know it's true. And so there's two different kinds of defensiveness. There's that which somebody tells you something you know is true and you don't want to admit it. And then there's the defensiveness, which is something you know is absolutely not true, and you just want to explain why you think that's not true. So they're different types. So just because a person doesn't take advice doesn't mean that they're defensive and they don't want to listen. Perhaps they have a strong opinion on a different direction. So anyway, sorting through people's true intentions can be difficult. But hell, sorting through my own intentions can be difficult. You know, how many of us really sit down and say, what do I really want out of life? I have, but I'm still working out the answers as I go along. Take care, everybody.